Thank you and welcome to the show for today. The topic today is the historical black colleges at the 21st century. And we have with us this morning to talk about the historical black colleges at the 21st century, Dr. Al-Hadid. Dr. Al-Hadid is a professor at Tennessee State University, and he will give us some additional information, Dr. Al-Hadid, as you talk about your background and your education. And let's have you to do that now, Dr. Al-Hadid, to give our audience some information about your background, your information, and some of the things that were eventually important in eventually leading you to the director of the Africana Studies Department at Tennessee State University. And then we'll talk about historical black colleges and where these institutions of higher education stand in the beginning of the 21st century.
Well, thank you, Dr. Haney. It's always an honor and a pleasure being on your show. You've had me on a number of times. But in terms of my background, I feel honored that you asked me to talk specifically about the historically black colleges. I went to George Washington Carver High School, which was an all-African-American school in Montgomery, Alabama. And in that same city, I went to Alabama State University, which is an HBCU established in the 1860s. And then after that, I left the Deep South and went out to California, where I got involved in working on my doctorates in sociology. And my dissertation topic was the sociology of Pan-Africanism. And while there, I helped to found the Black Studies Department at University of California, Santa Barbara. Came to Tennessee State University, worked for a number of years in the sociology department. Developed a concept of which is very popular here in the city called the Great Debate, where we look at the ideas of Dr. King and Malcolm X and examine contemporary issues. And then we started a movement to create an Africana Studies Department at Tennessee State University. So that department was established in 1994, of which I am the current chair and the founder of that department. And we're going strong and trying to understand the dialectic between the evolution of the historical black colleges and the thesis of the Africana Studies as it relates to the curriculum at these schools.
You know, Doctor, when we talk about these institutions of higher education, I think it's admitted that most of them came into being directly after the Civil War. As a sociologist as well, and might I say a very, very eminent sociologist, as well as the chairman of the Africana Studies Department at Tennessee State University, let's have you to sort of give us some sociological information relative to the emancipation of all of these Africans and the kind of status that many of them found themselves in that prompted the need for such institutions of higher education.
Well, first of all, we have to go back to Africa and realize that the Africans that were brought over here were not slaves. I mean, they were trained people. They were carpenters, tailors, scholars, intellectuals, theologians, grammarians, princes, leaders. And these people were brought over here to help primarily the Europeans from England develop a civilization, to help them develop an infrastructure. So they were made into slaves once they came over here. Now, there was a process by which they were made into slaves. The most devastating process was the stripping of them of their culture. They were stripped of their names, their languages, their religions, their ethnic identity, their customs, their family orientations. So in order to make these people into slaves, they had to do all that to them. They were unlike the indentures who were from England, who knew they were British. They spoke the English language. They maintained their names. But with the Africans, their names were taken away from them. They came from Wolof communities. They were Mandinkas. They were Hausas. They were Fulanis. And all that was taken away from them. So that when we look at the education of African Americans, we need to, clearly put that in perspective. So let's fast forward to emancipation. One thing that you said many years ago at one of the Emancipation Proclamation breakfasts is that we have to understand that Lincoln did not free the slaves. And you talked about the black saber soldiers, about 500,000 of them, joined the Union Army, and they literally fought for their freedom. So once they became emancipated, now the question is, what are we going to do with these ex-slaves? What are we going to do with these freedmen? So there were a number of issues on the table, but even before emancipation, The American Colonization Society said, well, why don't we send them back to Africa? So they established Liberia there, and some people chose to go to Liberia. Now, the whole trick with that was that people such as Martin Delany and Frederick Douglass saw this maneuver as a way of getting rid of the intellectuals and the leaders and the people that could read and write and sending them to Africa so there would be no leadership to fight for the abolition of the slave. So that didn't go very far, but it certainly continued. It was a missionary type of activity. So then when slaves became free, they set up what they called the Freedmen's Bureau. And the Freedmen's Bureau was designed to incorporate those Africans who remain here into the fabric of the American culture and society. Now, in doing that, the model that they selected was not a model of restoring their culture and their ethnic identity, but it was a model of assimilation, literally making them into black Anglo-Saxons. Another thing you have to understand about that period of time is that from 1619 to, well, 1865, it was illegal for an African to learn how to read and write. So that there were laws passed to this effect. So if you learn how to read or write, you were punished severely. They might cut your tongue out, cut your foot off. So in other words, ignorance, illiteracy, was something that was prescribed by law for the Africans. And we understand that to a certain extent, but we also understand that there were a number of people who were slave masters and overseers who were illiterate as well. And this became an issue. So that when they started saying, well, let's develop educational systems. Now, you mentioned earlier about the fact that many of these schools were created after slavery, which is very true. But we also like to let our audience know that about 5 of them were created during slavery. Cheney State, Lincoln, Wilberforce, and Hampton. These 5 or 6 schools were created before slavery. But now keep in mind, they were all started in the north, in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and then, of course, Hampton was in Virginia. Then after that, they started developing the others. Most of your historically black colleges are private or schools, and they were created either by missionaries or some philanthropic organization. Then, of course, the state came in and created schools such as Tennessee State University, Florida A&M, but schools such as Fisk, Morehouse, Spelman, all of those were created by missionaries, and they were created by, by that Freedmen's Bureau through philanthropy. Now, the whole idea is that when we get into the great debate about what type of curriculum, so you had 2 models. One model was the model that was developed by Booker T. Washington at Tuskegee, which was one that had to do with developing technocrats and developing the infrastructure. So these were people that went into the vocations. They became carpenters, plumbers, blacksmiths, and tailors, etc. Then, of course, you had the other model, which was the talented 10th model developed by Booker T. Washington, I mean, not Washington, but W.B. Du Bois. Du Bois felt that African Americans should have a liberal arts education, and he put more of an emphasis of African Americans going into the professions, such as being doctors, lawyers, businessmen, ministers, and medical doctors.
So-called talent, is that the talent?
The so-called talented 10th. And these were, as he put it, the race men who would lead the masses of the people into the future. Now, as we prosecuted those 2 arguments, one, the liberal arts talented 10th argument, and the other one, developing infrastructures, such as Booker T. Washington was talking about, when we come into the 20th century, Marcus Garvey starts to challenge that. Marcus Garvey said we should develop more along the lines that Booker T. Washington was talking. Washington was ultimately talking about self-reliance. He was talking about owning and controlling the mode of production. He was setting the stage for a class of African Americans to actually become black capitalists, owners and controllers of the mode of production. So even though we tend to see him as an accommodation, as Uncle Tom, his position was, why agitate for the right to vote, integration and all that, when you don't have development?
Hold that thought right there,
sir.
Doctor, and let us take this first commercial break, and we'll be back with you and to develop that further.
Okay.
We'll be back with our audience following. Is the historical black college